Good morning, everybody. I hope you had it's still morning, ain't it? Yeah, it is. Well, I hope everybody had a really, really good Christmas. Let me double check my audio settings here and make sure everything's working there. This microphone cable's on its last leg, so getting it to go in there was like, um, getting it to, getting it to go in there and work was like really annoying. So I'm gonna have to get a new cable for it and everything. If there's any audio issues, guys, please let me know in the comments and everything like that. All right, so I am really glad that I did not stream at all during that 3 game miniature season collapse that the Hurricanes had. There's 2 reasons I didn't do that. One, I was working a lot, so I wasn't home much to do anything. When I was home, I was just kind of, recharging and getting ready for the next day at work and hanging out with the girl, hanging out with the dogs, and watching the games, everything like that. Number 2, I sounded like General Grievous. I was coughing so much. Those were both blessings in disguise because I wouldn't have said anything rational, constructive, or objective during that entire span. So I am really, really glad I didn't say or do anything last week. It gave me a chance to kind of get myself into a little bit better of a mind frame to talk about this because I'm not Frank Fleming. I'm not Steve Dangle. I don't want to sit here and just chew on my glasses and scream in a high-pitched voice. And when I get excited, my voice gets really high-pitched. That must be a thing with dudes who are like built like stocky like I am. I want to actually like talk about the problem in a way that, or the series of problems. Let's not pretend there's not more than one. The series of problems that there are in what occurred over the course of the last 3 games. It highlighted some stuff we already knew. It brought discussions about stuff that has been discussed before. But I'm going to go over all of it. I'm going to give you my opinion on it. And additionally, while I was getting the show ready, I just did some handwritten notes today. While I was getting the show ready, I saw what the new lines are. And I'm going to talk about those a little bit because there's one particular line that I'm relatively happy with in there that I'm going to talk about a lot. And it's just kind of like, hopefully they'll stay that way for a little bit. I might say some things that piss people off who are, really pro-Rod, and I am pro-Rod. But I think the dynamic between him and Kotkaniemi needs to, like, whatever disconnect there is between the two of them for the good of the team, they need to mend it. Because I'm going to go into it, and you guys still think that, you guys know that I think KK is still, out of everybody you have, the best option, the closest thing you have to a legitimate second-line center. And that's not a knock on Stankoven. I think that he's just in over his head. That is not a short joke because he'd whip my ass. That boy, he's strong. But I'm just saying he's probably still the best option you currently have in the organization. So, first thing first here, we're going to talk about the game in Florida 3 games ago. The Canes had a 3-goal lead going into the third period, and they were lucky to have it because I had the game on at work, so when I wasn't doing stuff, I was glancing at it when I could. I did get to sit down and actually watch the third period. They never really totally got to their game until the third period, and that's when Florida really started stepping it up a notch with the goonery, with doing stuff after the whistle, getting in their heads, being physical, all that type of stuff. The typical stuff Florida does, especially if they're losing, especially if it's late. So that's a good thing right there. Or that's a bad thing right there. Carolina, that was a time where they needed to just withstand what was coming at them, and they walk away with that game. They walk away with 2 points that they probably shouldn't have even had a chance to get because they were mediocre that entire game except until the third period. They started really establishing zone time, but Florida was making them pay for it. From what I saw, like I said, I did not sit down and watch the entire game. AJ Greer, for the hit he laid on Jacob Slavin, someone's gloves should have been off immediately at that point. You just got Jacob Slavin back, and you let him get hit like that. Marchand speared Bussy in the nuts. That led to one of their goals. That was not answered for. Svechnikov had a really good game up until he did that TikTok stupid shit this season. And it just absolutely just ruined that entire game. That was one of those situations where all he had to do was golf wedge the puck and get it deep. And even if you don't get it in the net, it's 200 feet away from your net. That's the best place for it to be other than in the net at that point. I'm not calling Svechnikov a single point of failure in that game because he wasn't. He played well. I believe he had two assists, 7 shots on 7 shot attempts and 8 hits, something like that. I don't remember the exact stat line. But he played well that game for the most part. He was one of the few players that I thought consistently played well in that game. Up until he did that. Like in my favorite movie. That was some of the best flying I'd seen yet, right up until you got killed. That's exactly what happened with him. So, overtime. The Rodriguez thing. This is one thing where I have to disagree with Adam Gold and some other people. People are saying that Rodriguez violently swiped at Jarvis's foot and never tried to play the puck. No NHL player does that in that situation. Jarvis came in there with a ton of speed. Rodriguez was a little bit overwhelmed. I don't think he went for his skates on purpose. And I'm not an Evan Rodriguez fan at all. I actually hate him. I think he sucks. But that was one of those situations where he was attempting to sweep the puck out from underneath him, because if he'd gotten a hold of that there, Jarvis is going a million miles an hour the other direction. Rodriguez could have created a transition play if he got possession there. Additionally, you're not going to take the chance of swiping at someone's feet like that and then going into your goalie with all that speed and getting hurt. None of that was going to happen. None of that was a factor. Rodriguez was not thinking, let me trip Jarvis at this precise geometric angle and injure him. But the standard in the league has changed to where clean hits result in fights. Situations like that result in fights. And that was one time that was another time where somebody should have done something and they didn't. And when those added up, that eventually culminated in Florida winning in the shootout. Normally, I don't like back-to-backs, and you got a lot of them this year because of the Olympic break. But this was a blessing in disguise for the Hurricanes to have a back-to-back after a third-period collapse like that and be able to play 24 hours later and get it out of their system. That's something you don't want to sit around and think about, in my opinion. And then they damn near identical result the next night. Blew another 3-goal lead. A little bit, it's a little bit worse in a way because that lead was chipped away at over the course of time. They didn't give it up in less than 3 minutes like they did against Florida. So, a lot of the same stuff happened that Nick Paul absolutely bitched Mark Jankowski. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat it. Mark Jankowski turtled against Nick Paul. And the guy who was taken out of the lineup so that he could be in it, Kotkaniemi, was the one who went over there and got involved in that scrum and bailed him out. So, out of all these 3 games, because I'm going to talk about the Florida game at home that was right before the break next, those 2 were actually mild compared to what happened in the other one. So in the most recent game, that was one of those times where you didn't respond during the previous game with Florida. You have a relatively short turnaround before you play them again. You have a chance at that point to send a message. That's when you put 5 players out there who are willing to fight. That is when you put 5 players out there to deter and send a message. That's when Kotkaniemi, Svechnikov, whoever else you had available that would drop the mitts and, be able to throw should have been out there. That was one night where a line brawl should have happened. At a minimum, at least one person's glove should have been off. Every single chance you had to finish a hit that night needed to happen, and it did not. That was very disappointing for me. I was hoping that maybe that this team would say, all right, I'm not going to get bullied anymore, and they're going to go and send a message from the start. Because everything that happened after 1959 clicked off was irrelevant compared to what should have happened at the 20-minute mark of the first period. At 0:01 on the clock, names, numbers, and a pound of flesh should have been taken, and it was not done. I have a huge problem with the fact that this team, when it had a chance to send a message to say, you're not going to injure 2 of our best players, even though one of them was definitely not intentional, you have a chance to send a message. And I'm not saying go out there and injure people. If they get injured in the process, so be it. Because they would do it to you, and they wouldn't think twice. Sam Bennett saw a perfect opportunity to eliminate Jacob Slavin in the playoffs a few years ago when Burns sent him that suicide pass, and that's exactly what he did. And I would expect anybody who is paid to do what he does to do that. I'm going to go a little bit more into the playoff history of these teams as well in a minute because it's pretty relevant to what we're talking about. Now, a lot of people talk about the whole dynamic of the Department of Player Safety thing and the Colin Campbell conflict of interest possibility and all that. That is irrelevant to what I'm going to talk about for the next point. Even if you think that is a problem, which it very well could be. I'm not saying it is. I'm not saying it isn't. There might be a conflict of interest there. There might not. On the surface level, it looks like one. It's like if you have a judge, you don't have an attorney also there on either side that's related to him. That's a conflict of interest. You can't do that. And that's essentially what it is. It's that type of dynamic. So it shouldn't be a thing to begin with, but it is. And there's nothing that you, me, or much of anybody else other than the people in power at the National Hockey League can do about it. So don't consider that when you decide which 5 guys you put out there to start that game. You can either stand up to the Florida Panthers, which you have the capability of doing. You may take some penalties in the process. Or you can allow the Florida Panthers and, by extension, the Department of Player Safety, if they're really in bed with them like a lot of people think they are, to have that dynamic and have that power over you, or you can fight the one that you're able to fight. You can fight back against one of those things. You can't fight back against Dopus, but you can fight back against the Florida Panthers, and they chose not to do it. Now, whatever dynamic is involved with that, whether that's something you want to put on the coaching staff, whether you want to put that on the players, whoever, that was a time where they needed to respond. I'm not saying start every single game in an 82-game season that way, but that was one of those times where they needed to respond, and they didn't do it. Yes, 2 points is paramount. Having 5 guys drop the gloves at the beginning of that game would have had negative outcome on that game for the Hurricanes, and they didn't do it. That is a problem. Another reason why that's an issue, if you know the Florida Panthers play the way that they do, you have to do something to counter that. If you do not do anything to counter that, they will continue to have their way with you. They will continue to build on the history between the Hurricanes and the Panthers in the previous few seasons that has heavily favored the Panthers in that regard. They will continue to do those things as long as they're able to do so. If the league allows them to do it, there's nothing you can do about it. But what you can do is you can send a message to the Florida Panthers that you're going to take your pound of flesh, and they're not going to do what they want to do with absolutely no pushback. Until that changes, nothing will be different with this team. It will be the exact same result should Carolina and Florida play each other in the playoffs again. Now, as far as that collapse goes, a third period 3-goal collapse, Florida didn't even have to play dirty. Florida didn't even really have to play super physical. Bad defensive breakdowns. I think that there was a little bit of a psychological element there with the Hurricanes, and that's growing. That's only getting worse. The longer that this goes on, it's only getting worse. So, let me flip over to my next page here. Here's one thing I want to reference. I've not sat down and watched this show, except for the Jarvis episode, but I've seen the clip of it, where Matthew Tkachuk is going by the Hurricanes bench, and he's telling the team, you've quit on your coach, you've quit on your captain, you've quit on each other, you've quit on your fans, whatever he was saying. Something like that should have gotten a response of some sort from somebody. Nothing meaningful anyway. And he was absolutely right. Until you respond to that type of stuff will continue. That's one of the reasons why I wanted Scott Morrow out of here, because everything else he did in Game 1 last season was forgivable, except for when he skated by Matthew Tkachuk after pulling up from a perfect opportunity to finish a hit on him and maybe end his series, because he'll do it to you. And I'm going to go out there and kick ass, and he did nothing. He had an opportunity to take care of that, and he didn't do it. And that entire mentality is kind of on the team right now, and that's got to stop, or nothing is going to change. You will have the exact same result in May if you're there to face them. Out of all the fights that there have been this year, one of them, and there's not been many, out of all the fights the Hurricanes have had this year, the second smallest guy in franchise history. I'm pretty sure the only person that's smaller than Logan Stankoven, or shorter, I'll say, because Stankoven's a strong kid. The only person that has been smaller than him in franchise history was Nathan Gerbe. When Logan Stankoven accounts for either 33 or 25% of your fights over the course of a season, and I'm not saying go out there and start fights for no reason. If you got to do it as a response to something, or a preemptive strike to send a message, that's fine. But when he's one of the few people dropping the gloves on this team, you have a problem. 6'4", 205-pound Mark Jankowski won't play physical if his life depends on it. And that is a problem. So until those things change, nothing changes. So, the team toughness. You have occasional games where they show it. The last regular season game against Washington in Raleigh last year, they did it. Why can you not do that against Florida? If you continue to be afraid, if they continue to smell that fear, they will continue to do what they're doing. Push back. Do something. If you take penalties, whatever. Penalty kill's good enough. Even without Slavin, it's still doing all right. You generate more chances shorthanded than you do on the power play anyway. Might as well go that route with it. So whether that is a coaching issue or the player's mentality issue, whatever it is, because there's this narrative out there that Rod coaches in a way that discourages those type of actions. I don't think that's true, especially considering the time frame in which he played. And there were plenty of times where he threw the gloves off because it had to be done. I don't think that's the case. I would like to think it's not. But you endanger the team if you don't respond to things like that. You have people on that team that are capable of responding in that manner. And if the team does not show a capacity for violence, a willingness to fight, a willingness to finish every single legal hit that they can, none of this will change. Simple solutions for simple problems. Everyone on this team needs to be more physical. They need to have more bite. They need to be more willing to do things like that. Again, or nothing will change. So, what do they do to fix this? Well, first thing first, if they lose tonight, for example, it might be time for another one of those player-only meetings like they had in 23-24 when they came out of October, or they came out of November, and I think that they were just barely over 500. And that was a time where discussions were had. We're not privy to know what was said, but whatever it was, it worked. They turned the corner shortly after that. You might need to do something like that here in the near future. People often, I think that just because Jordan Stahl, for example, is not one of those guys who's very animated with the media, think that he's not an animated captain. We have no idea what goes on behind closed doors. If he wasn't an effective captain, Carolina would not have gotten as far as they have in the playoffs multiple times. So effectiveness is there. We don't know what he says or does behind closed doors, but I would imagine that he's a very different player in those types of situations, a very different person than he is when he talks to the media. And that's not anything irregular. That's pretty normal that there's a lot of guys who will talk to the media one way and talk behind closed doors another. And that's totally fine. Actually, I think it should be that way. We had a saying in the military, praise in public, correct in private. And I've experienced that in the government. I've experienced that in the corporate world. I would imagine it's not too dissimilar on a personal level for the guys on the team. So, for those of you who know the dynamic of the whole Miracle on Ice team, I wish Disney hadn't made that movie because of some of the stuff that was taken out of it. However, one thing that was said in there that's also in Boys of Winter, which really good book. I highly recommend it. I'm going to read it again at some point. I'm going to try to do it before the Olympics because I want to make some content related to that. Say the right things at the right time. You don't always have to be the best guy on the team to be the captain. And you just need to be able to, when it's the right time, set it straight. The people who yell all the time, Eventually, your messages get lost because people shut down and they stop listening. And I don't think that's what goes on with the Canes. I do think that there needs to be a little bit more emphasis put on moments like that, and they need to have them a little bit more often right now. They talk about how those games shouldn't be a referendum on the team. They are. Whether you like it or not, they are. And the reason for that is because of this extensive history you have with Florida whipping your ass in the playoffs. And when you have a chance to push back on them and show them you're not going to do that without a fight, nothing. That has to stop. All right. So now what? Jankowski being in the lineup over Kotkaniemi, especially in games like that, absolutely stupid. I'm sorry, it is. It's dumb. If Kotkaniemi was taken out of the lineup in favor of Jankowski strictly based off of face-off percentages, 36 over 2 games, yeah, it's not good, but it's 2 games. It shouldn't have happened. Especially if you're talking about going later on in the season. Now you're playing against a team like Florida, one of the few guys on this team who can actually throw with somebody and who will actually consistently throw hits. You don't take him out of the lineup at that point. You sure as hell don't put him on wing out of his natural position and expect good results. Thankfully, he's back at second line center tonight. We will talk about that more. The Stankoven at the second line center experiment, and this is not a insult to Stankoven. This is not a knock on him. I think that experiment needs to end, and it needs to be done entirely. The only other thing I can imagine is that maybe you put Stankoven with Robinson and Hall and let him try and develop more of that skill set as a center there. That's the only other thing you can really do. Stankoven does a lot of good things away from the puck as a center. It's when he has the puck and when you're the center, you're the primary play driver driving forward there in most cases. Even with someone like Ehlers on the line, you need to be able to protect the puck with your body. You need to be able to go in corners and not get pushed off of it. All those types of things. You have a lot more responsibility at that position than you do at wing in terms of things like that. I don't think that Stankoven has that in his toolkit, unfortunately. Additionally, his offense has gone down a lot because of it. Now, that was to be expected. Wingers are going to provide you more goals and more primary assists and a lot of other situations like that. So, Stankoven has one of the best shots on the team. He needs to be shooting the puck more often, and he'll be shooting the puck more often if he's back on wing, and he's back on wing tonight. That's a good thing. So, that considered, I think that experiment needs to end. If your 4 centers are Aho, Kotkaniemi, Stahl, Jankowski, in that order, go with that for a while and don't change it up just because a couple of things don't go right off the hop. Give them time to acclimate and learn and figure stuff out. That's the best thing you can do. Don't change up anything like that just because there's a couple of mistakes or a couple of turnovers. Give them time to figure it out. And I'm very close to having my dream second line, but it all depends on what else happens. So one of the other things with Stankoven, we have to remember he's young, he's still developing. The Canes were trying to convert Felix Ungersorm from wing to center, and it did not go well at the American Hockey League level. Now that he's back to playing wing, his numbers are back up. It's kind of a similar thing with Stankoven trying to put him over there. I understand he was drafted as a center, but there are a lot, and I mean a lot of wingers in the National Hockey League that are drafted as centers and end up becoming wingers. Then you have the occasional opposite case like Sebastian Aho, who was drafted as a winger and converted to a center and had a whole other skill set that was cultivated and grown particularly by Rod Brind'Amour. That was lightning in a bottle. That's the exception, not the rule. That's not going to happen much. Good things there. So that's a great thing that happened. It was necessary to this team's success. Expecting it to happen more than once is kind of unrealistic. So I'm personally ready for that experiment to be over. I want Stankoven to be on the wing. I want Stankoven shooting the puck. So I'm hoping that that's the case with that. So that's basically all I have to say about those particular players. Now, as far as the entire team dynamic, we already talked about the team toughness thing and everything like that. And we already talked about leaving the lines alone. Let's get back to basics first things. Establishing the zone has not been as good lately, especially over these last 3 games. That needs to change. That is, Carolina's identity as a team is the relentless forechecking, holding the offensive zone, and creating chance after chance after chance, volume shooting, and scoring. Is it a perfect system? No, but no system is perfect. If you want to make those types of things happen, you got to get back to your identity. So in that dynamic, you need to get back to your identity. But going back to what I was talking about before, in other ways you need to change your identity. Carolina's pretty much always going to have a negative hit differential coming out of every game because they possess the puck so much. When you don't have the puck, lay the body on people every chance you get. It's a war of attrition at both ends of the ice. You got to be able to do it in your end and in their end. A lot of times the forechecking results in stick on puck plays, which in a lot of cases are fine, but there's a lot of times where they don't finish hits that they could. That's something else that needs to change. Finish your checks every chance you get. Wear them down in their own zone with more than just moving your feet and more than just stick on puck plays. It's usually more favorable to separate the puck from the player than separate the player from the puck in the offensive zone. Generate chances faster that way. Well known, agreed. That being said, finish hits more often, it won't kill you. You do those things, you're in a better spot. Now, moving on to what the line, I'm going to pull the screenshot I took here. All right. So these are the lines tonight with Jarvis being out. No Slavin as well. Svechnikov, Aho, Stankoven. So you can put Stankoven in that spot where Jarvis is. They have a lot of similarities in their skill set. I'm good with that. Ehlers, Kotkaniemi, Blake. Now, one thing that those of you who follow me on X have seen that I've posted about lately, if you remember how good Svechnikov, Kotkaniemi, and Necas were as a line, Ehlers has a lot of the same things in his toolkit that Necas does. I've always described Ehlers as Necas if he was better defensively. That's kind of what he is. Very fast, generates entries, generates a lot of puck possession, really good play driver. And he's playing on his natural side. Depending on what the Hurricanes do on the market, and the market's not very open right now because a lot of the guys you would have potentially traded with are playing pretty well. That's probably not going to change until you get closer to the deadline. And even then, depending on what the standings are looking like, it may not change at all from where it is right now. Kind of got to make what you have work for the time being and maybe into the future. If the Hurricanes acquire another winger, preferably a left winger, a definitive left winger, I would like to see Ehlers, Kotkaniemi, and Svechnikov for a line. There were a lot of times last year where Kotkaniemi, Necas, and Robinson played really well together. I want a similar dynamic, but not involving Eric Robinson because Robinson is really the staple of that bottom six. I want him to stay there. And he's one of the best shooters on the team now, and you need something like that for the sake of secondary scoring, but he needs to stay where he is. And that's not a slight on Robinson. You guys know that I really like him. But I want guys like him and Hall to add lethality to that bottom six, and the Hurricanes find another way to make the top six better. That's the biggest things that I want to see as far as that is concerned. So let's say you go out and get another left winger. Someone like, say, I'm just throwing a name out there. I'm not saying that this is going to happen. Actually, hold up. Let me look at one thing real quick. So let's just say that you manage to acquire a player like Jason Robertson. You put him where Svechnikov is. You put Svechnikov where Kotkaniemi is. Or excuse me, you put Svechnikov where Blake is. And Jarvis comes back and you have Robertson, Aho, Jarvis, Ehlers, Kotkaniemi, Svechnikov. And then that gives you Blake and Stankoven in other ways that you can distribute throughout the lineup. A bunch of different things that you can do there if you have to acquire another winger, if you can't get a center. One way or another, the team needs to be improved in some capacity before the deadline. Of course, you would rather get a center. If you can't do that, then improve the team in another way. Add another winger if you have to. But don't add another sub 6 foot guy. This team is too small. And this might be controversial, what I'm about to say now. The size and the lack of physicality is a bigger problem than the scoring, and it's not mutually exclusive anyway. The lack of size and physicality usually leads to collapses like what we have seen lately. address that, and the other problem will start to be mitigated or maybe sort itself out entirely, which is not scoring enough. Teams do that to Carolina when they bully them. That's what's got to change there. So let's do that, hopefully. But, of course, the priority would be to add a center. Goaltending is stable for right now. Not too worried about that. If you can improve it, great, but I'm not worried about that. You got 3 goalies. You have 3 serviceable NHL goalies right now. Bossy has shown a lot of promise. I'm still pumping the brakes on him a little bit, but the collapse in the game against Florida was definitely not on him. Another reason why I bring all this stuff up, if you want someone like Robert Thomas to come to Carolina, who is a very skilled player, who would have to waive his no-trade clause for that to happen, you may want to show that players like that will be protected when they're fucked with. Matthew Tkachuk had Sebastian Aho by his sweater, pointing him at him, right up in his face, pointing at him, telling him he was taking his number, amongst other things, as if Aho was a disobedient child. Nothing was done. That can't happen. You can't have other teams' goons, albeit very skilled ones, or pests, whatever you want to call them, sitting in the box saying, I got you, and nobody saying, no, you don't. He got absolutely mugged in the playoffs last year, and nobody did anything about it. And he still almost extended that series single-handedly. How much better is he going to play if he knows that someone has got his 6? Because right now, he might not feel like anyone's got him taken care of in the event that something like that happens again. That has to change too. So, with what you have right here, you don't exactly have a Stanley Cup winning top 6. When fully healthy, you have a really great defense. You have a really solid bottom 6 if you let the bottom 6 be a bottom 6 and not mix up the lines too much. But ideally, top 6 center is your number 1 target in trades, preferably not of the stopgap kind. You're in the early part of a second window, so you want to get someone with term, i.e. Robert Thomas. Again, not sure that's going to happen because of the no trade clause, and apparently St. Louis isn't interested in moving him right now anyway, which is stupid on their part. They're going to prolong their retooling, rebuilding, whatever it is. And Robert Thomas might not see a playoff game again for God knows how long because of that. But that's your priority. If you can't do that, then get a winger. And those things don't have to be categorized the same. If you can do one and not the other, great. If you do one, doesn't mean you don't need to accomplish the other. If you do go out and get Robert Thomas, that doesn't mean that you can't also go out and get Jason Robertson. This is way too good of a team at its core to let it just let it go to the playoffs like this. And everyone is trying to do their job. Nobody is saying that Rod's not trying. Nobody is saying that Tulsky's not trying. I'm sure there are. You want these trades to happen. The other side still has to say yes. But as far as what you have in-house, you have problems you can solve here in the meantime, and that's where the coaching staff and the leadership group comes into play. When you get those things done, at that point, then you can start addressing the external factors to fix what you have going on. But as long as teams, whether it's Florida or anybody else, have the ability to just run amok on Carolina and nobody do anything about it, nothing's going to be any different. Nothing. So tonight, for starters, get back to your game. Add some bark, add some bite. Speaking of bark, I'm making Frank wear his little scarf. You can't see him out of the frame. He looks really adorable in it. He's mad at me, but I don't care. He's my dog. But I'm making him wear his little scarf. He looks really adorable in his scarf. So, rant over. This would not been as coherent and well thought out if I had done this a couple of days ago. So I'm glad that I had time to think about it and really address those things. So, hopefully they start turning a corner tonight. You don't want a 4th loss in a row. And you definitely don't want another third period 3-goal collapse. You definitely don't want another third period collapse that's chipped away with over the course of 2 periods like they had against Tampa. You don't want any of that. You're playing against a relatively good team with Detroit. Good game to bounce back. Let's see what they can do. I've not totally lost faith in this season, but this weekend needs to be put in the rearview mirror very quickly, to the point where they play really well for the next several games, win most of them, and we can say, haha, you remember when we thought the season was over a few weeks ago? Because it sure as hell felt that way while all that was going down. But the next time that Matthew Tkachuk grabs Sebastian Aho and has his finger in his face and he's telling him whatever he wants to tell him, that shit can't stand. That's where someone goes out there and does what needs to be done about it after the fact. If you don't do that, you don't win anything. It's just that simple. I will now get to some of the comments. Daniel, what's up, buddy? Glad you're doing the stream. Needed a distraction. Good to have you here, pal. Hope everything's going well for you. All 3 games versus Florida teams has demolished my confidence in the team. Mine's pretty low right now. What they do tonight, no matter how well they play, if they win, whatever, it's going to take more than one game to undo the damage that was done from these 3. You know, they talk about the whole slippery slope fallacy. We're outside of the fallacy part right now. We are, the team is on a slippery slope. And if you want to solve those issues, excuse me, one second. If you want to solve those issues, it involves a collective effort, a change of mindset, and sticking with it starting tonight. This is not a problem that is fixed in one night. This is not a problem that's fixed in one game. This is not a problem that's fixed in one players only meeting. This is not a problem that's fixed because you got a few days off because of Christmas. This is something where you check every single block of everything you've done wrong and make sure you've corrected it. Every single deficiency has to be corrected from highest priority to lowest priority. The front office has to do their job. Hopefully they can make a trade or two to address that. And the guys on the ice have to do their job. The coaching staff has to do their job. Group effort. Reese, what's up, dude? Can't believe I watched this team blow back-to-back, 2-back multi-goal leads in 3 consecutive games. The third game, I didn't even have a reaction, neither did the team. Yeah, I was pretty much about that too. Agassi, what's up? Kotkaniemi not on power play too, and knew that would happen. I don't know why he's not. I mean, Kotkaniemi, it's like, and I actually want to talk about this a little bit more. Like I said, out of all the potential options you have for another top 6 center, the closest thing you have to it is Kotkaniemi. Size, generates breakouts, can make plays. Takes him forever to load up his shot, but he's got a cannon when he doesn't fan on it and everything. He's the best option you have. When you consider size, physicality, playmaking capability, he's your best shot at that. Not Stankoven, not Stahl, definitely not Jankowski. I want him gone. I'm not even going to pretend otherwise. I'm hoping that whenever Carolina makes a deal that he's included in it. I'd rather, if you got to call up another center, I'd rather have Robidas up there. I really would. I'm not impressed with Jankowski this season at all. And I think people overvalued him because of the 7-for-7 insanity run he went on last season after the deadline. I'm just not impressed with him at all this season. I'm hoping he gets traded. I legitimately hope he's traded. Dylan says, if you could take Tulski spot this trade season, who are the players you're going after hard? Right now, nobody, because the market's not open. There's just, you had a potential partner with Buffalo, but now they're winning, and they're winning a lot. So that's not going to happen. And the one guy I really want out of St. Louis, you can't really get him because he's got a no trade clause, and it looks like St. Louis isn't interested in, trading him anyway. I'll get to something the Sound the Siren said about it. Yeah, I'm more than willing to overpay for a guy like Robert Thomas. I really am. Thank you for reposting Sound the Siren coaching messaging. Yeah, that's one thing that definitely, if that's a factor, that needs to change. Tripp tried to cite Kotkaniemi up, I think, with the interview, and I was hoping he would be paired with that line. Yeah, that's where I want him to be. And he's there right now. I hope he stays there. Sound the Siren says Oompa Loompas group. Yeah, that's another thing. Like, I'm at this point, I'm okay with Stankoven or Blake getting moved out to add some size or physicality. You have 3 undersized, really good right shot right wingers, and that's what these last games have proven to me, is that's where Stankoven needs to be, is on the wing. So Jarvis ain't going anywhere, that's for damn sure. But Stankoven and Blake, if the right offer comes along to improve the team in ways that needs to be improved, I'm listening to it personally. I really would. I like both of those players. It would be a tough decision on which one to give up. I think Blake is better right now, but I think Stankoven has a higher ceiling. His development is going to hit a little bit of a hiccup from where they've tried to try him out at center, i.e. why I referenced the whole Felix Unger-Sorum thing. But if teams are wanting them, especially with both of them signed, and they know exactly what their cap hit's going to be for the next several years, I'm listening at this point. Because you cannot go back to the playoffs with this group and expect to win. Maybe you get lucky and you don't have to play Florida. Even then, I'm not confident in this group to get past the conference finals. I'm really not. Because if you don't play Florida, you're probably playing Tampa. Fully healthy Tampa is still a beast of a team. Boys versus men is all it really boils down to, says Will Parks. I've come to realize this core is bitch made. Yeah, that's something that's got to change with the messaging. Trade secondary. You never want to lose more than 2 games in a row. Agreed, Dylan. Martinick has even said when Stahl speaks, they listen up. Yeah, like we don't know what goes on behind closed doors, but I would be willing to bet Dordo is a completely different person away from the media as far as how he delivers his messaging. I really think that. Stahl isn't the captain to bark all the time. He speaks up when needed. Yeah, Micah Ruzioni type of dynamic. That's a good thing. If the last 3 games was a playoff series, 1 game away from going to play golf. Yeah, that's why it's like this is a referendum on the team. It really is. How are they going to respond to it? Like they have to at this point. So Daniel says, and yes, I agree with how this team runs and how Rod does it, and people who criticize him for not publicly shaming don't understand leadership and teamwork. Yeah, you don't want to public. If you have to say something publicly, you say everybody needs to play better, even if you know that certain guys are playing well and certain ones aren't, because that's how you maintain a collective identity. Is saying it's like with any other job. There's going to be days where maybe your coworkers don't feel great and you got to pick up the slack, and vice versa. You're going to have days where you don't feel great and they got to pick up your slack. I was sick the entire week at the pro shop. When it's 29 degrees in the morning when I'm walking my dog and 62 at 11 in the morning, I get sick every time. I was congested as hell, and I did my fair share of stuff, but I didn't do nearly as much as I would have if I felt well. It's kind of the same thing with a hockey team in a way, sort of, where, okay, so-and-so's not playing well. I got to step it up. I have to pull the rope a little bit more than him tonight. That's the mentality you got to have. Play for each other and everything. And I know that, that's what frustrates me the most about this team. I know they're capable of it. This team doesn't suck. Like, they are fully capable of playing that way. They're fully capable of having that mentality and that dynamic. They just got to figure out how to do it. Like, this team is not bad by any means. The last 3 games that they lost, they beat themselves. And that is frustrating. That's what's frustrating to me. I know they've got the right coach for the job. I know they've got most of the right players for the job. They just have to figure out to work with what they've got and hope that the GM can add more. But that's on the front office to do. There's nothing the players or Rod or anybody like that can do about improving the roster. That's on Tulsky to do. But hopefully he can do his part. But if this group goes to the playoffs like this, they're not going to win anything. They might get to the conference finals again. That's it. There's absolutely no reason for this. So that's the only thing we can really hope for. Key, Paul Maurice is owning Rob Brindamore messaging. Yeah, it looks like that because, Tripp was talking about it during one of the games about how during the TV timeout that Maurice was very animated with the guys. Now, there are times where Rod has done that. One of the most notable ones was actually in Florida back in 2019. He called the timeout in, I want to say it was the second period. He pulls them all over there, and he was chewing their asses. Like, he was letting them have it. His daughter, I remember, posted the video of him going off on them, and she wrote something to the degree of, when he found out I was hiding a cat in my room, and he was letting them have it. Like, he was just going full drill instructor on them. I'm not saying that needs to happen all the time because eventually that messaging goes stale, but maybe it needs to happen a little bit more. But he went off on them for about 20 seconds of that timeout. And then when it ended, he did something like this, like, get out of my face, like, go out there and do better. Like, it was, you don't see him do stuff like that often, but there's times where it's called for. And that was one of them because that was back before Florida was really good even. And Carolina just about blew I think it was a 4-goal lead actually in that game. And Dougie Hamilton executed one of the greatest shot blocks I've ever seen him execute, which means that which means it was one of the 5 best ones I ever saw him do, because let's face it, he wasn't the most defensively competent player in Carolina. It's a good thing he was with Slavin. You guys see how animated Maurice was behind the bench? Meanwhile, Rod's team is blowing the league, and he's just behind the bench chewing gum. Yeah, that's got to stop. Yeah, that's where he's got to get to that. There are 3 A's in the room that need to speak up, not just Stahl. And I'm sure they are, but it's just got to happen more. Will Parks needs to see that in Carolina. RBA takes his anger out on his gun. Hello, Mason Marchment missed. Yeah, again, because Carolina, I think they almost got him in free agency a few years ago. I mean, granted, I believe that was from Pagnotta, so take it with an entire boulder of salt. But, distinct possibility there. Additionally, Brandon Thomas is worth an overpay. Yeah, if you send them such a good offer that they actually take the time to talk to Robert Thomas about waiving his no trade clause, maybe you get that done. Andrew Pinelli, what's up, buddy? If you don't do that, you don't win anything. It's that simple. That's it. That is it. Yeah, that's kind of how I feel about it right now. That's really how I feel about it. Yes, they are not bad, but to your point, this current lineup is not a cup-winning team. I'm sorry, it's not. They would need like some serious bracket luck, or everyone staying healthy and all the other teams that they would potentially face in the playoffs not staying healthy. And I as Obi-Wan Kenobi said, in my experience, there's no such thing as luck. So you can't rely on luck to get you there. You have to just control the circumstances you can control. And as far as the organization goes, that's from the top down. That's from the front office trying to, make a trade. And that's from the coaching staff, new messaging, leadership group, new messaging, players respond to all those things accordingly. Yeah, the notion that this team is worse than last year's is crazy. We could barely string together more than 2 wins in November, March, and you could tell that there was a funk during that stretch. Yeah, no, this team is better than it's playing. It really is. This team is significantly better than how it's been playing. They need to figure it out. No excuses, but just looking at it realistically. Yeah. No, this team is much better. Like, even with all the injury, and now, like, people talk about, well, why are we panicking about stuff? They've still got this good of a record despite losing how many man hours they've lost to injuries and everything. That is not solely, but predominantly because a waiver claim came in here and solved the goaltending issue for the time being. I don't want to imagine where this team would be in the standings without Bussy. They'd probably be in wild card 1. Like, let's just be real about it. 11-1-1. How many of those games do Carolina win without him? 6, 7, maybe. Daniel says, I do wonder if the Rangers intend to get a wild card and play on the road, the whole team, since their road game is so strong. Yeah, and that's another thing I want to talk about. There was someone that posted something about, and I've never seen this account be right about anything. There was someone that posted about Carolina is keeping an eye on the Artemi Panarin situation. I understand Panarin is an incredibly skilled player. He's one of the best ones in the world, but you don't need another undersized, no forechecking, right shot winger. I don't care how good he is. Doesn't fill a need at all. He is not a drastic improvement over any of the ones you already have. And what are you going to do? Move Jarvis down the lineup to slot him with Aho? No. Is Panarin going to play second line minutes? No. Is Panarin going to play on the second power play unit if Rod doesn't want to put him on the top one? No. That shouldn't even be looked at. He doesn't fit any needs. He really doesn't. And on top of that, expiring contract, you're probably not going to be able to keep him. Not the type of place he wants to play based on what went down last time that he was in, unrestricted free agency anyway, and how big of a deal that was. Don't even bother with it. Don't even look at it. Not even worth talking about. Not even worth talking about. Daniel says, not being cocky, but I do feel we could beat anyone in the East in the playoffs, and there's no one that concerns me except the Panthers and the Rangers if they get a wild card spot. I'm concerned about them playing against anybody in the East right now, just because of how poorly the team is playing. That's something that, if that doesn't change, then it doesn't matter. That's my only thing about it. That you gotta solve your problems in house first, and there's plenty of them to be solved. Luckily, it's early enough in the season where you can get all that stuff sorted out. But by the time the Olympic break is over, hopefully all those things are solved, because you can't wait on this for very long. And then, not to mention, we talked about this before, the last 2 months of Carolina's schedule is brutal. If they come out of it 2 games over 500, if they come out of that with a 550 win percentage, I'm fine, because that's going to be hard. But this was the time of year they need to make hay. They made a decent amount of it, but they could have had 6 more points than what they do easily. And they've blown it every single time. Or, excuse me, 5 more points than what they have, and they've blown it. They would have been sitting in a much better spot if they could have just, I can't remember the last time Carolina was having this hard of a time, putting 60-minute efforts together that often, that consistently. Like, that's not been a problem for the most part, but the last 3 games, it has been a problem. And this team is built to play with the lead. So you have to play 60 minutes. You can't outscore your problems on this team. You have to take the lead. You have to sink your teeth into it and hold on to it with the way that this roster is built and with the way that they play. That has to be done, or it just doesn't work. All right, guys, that is going to be it for me, I think. I am going to go get some ice time. I have only been going to the rink to work, and I would like to go there for fun. So I'm going to go skate, and I will probably... I don't know if I'm doing Landfall Hour tonight. I don't know if Damage Report is happening or not. I will do my best, but I do have some other plans today after I skate. Everyone, thank you very much for joining me. I think this team will turn it around. I really, really do. But the sooner it starts, the better. Everyone, hope you have a good day. I will see you soon.